Good afternoon, Kavita.
Good afternoon, sir.
How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you, sir?
Fine.
So good afternoon, everyone, and the dignitaries who have joined us for this webinar today. I am Dr. Kavita Kumari, Assistant Professor in the Department of Education. I'm very happy to inform you, sir, and everyone that Mizoram University, since the time lockdown was imposed, every day under the kind guidance of our Vice Chancellor, Sir, Professor K.R.S. Sambasiwara, we have been organizing webinars. And to keep that dialogue, the academic dialogue and conversation on, I'm really privileged and honored that Professor V. Sudhakar, sir, has kindly agreed to give a talk today. And I'm also happy to tell you that along with Professor V. Sudhakar, on this webinar, Professor H. Malswamy, who is the head of the Department of Education, has also joined. Besides Professor Lal Masai Chuango, who is a senior professor in the Department of Education and director of UGC HRDC, has also joined us today. So I welcome all of you to today's webinar. And for the formal welcome address, I would like to invite Professor Lal Masai Chuango to introduce the speaker and formally welcome the speaker. Thank you, ma'am. Over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. With profound thankfulness, I welcome Professor Venu Kapali Sudhakar, Dean, School of English Language Education, the English and Foreign Languages University, FLU, Central University, Hyderabad, who will be a speaker in this webinar organized by Department of Education, Mizoram University. You know, Professor Sudhakar has a diverse educational background. He has master's degrees in physics, psychology, philosophy, education, and he is MS in counseling and psychotherapy and is PhD in education. He is currently a professor in the Department of Education and Dean, School of English Language Education. He is also Director IQSC and the Director USR of the FLU Hyderabad. Before joining FLU Hyderabad, he had been professor, head, and dean in the Faculty of Education, Osmania University. He is a consultant to the World Bank, DFID, UNICEF, and a visiting faculty to a number of universities, civil society organizations, and government institutions across the country. So today, we are having such a resource person with diverse educational background and experience as our speaker. So our warm welcome is dedicated to you, sir, and we are happy to have you as our speaker in our today's webinar. Now, besides our speaker, I welcome all the participants who are essential ingredients for the success of this webinar. Now, I wish all the best for our organizing team, Professor H. Malswamy, head of the department and convener of this webinar, Dr. Kavita Kumari, assistant professor and organizing secretary, Dr. Pratik Chaurasya, assistant professor, who is in the team as a technical assistant for this webinar. So thank you, all of you.
Thank you, ma'am. And so with your permission, can we start the session now?
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Please, then over to you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Kavita. Distinguished faculty and dear students, Kavita Kumari, she is my student in the sense, actually she is my teacher. I learned a lot from her during her doctoral study period. And Kavita Kumari is a very critical in her approach, and she did commendable work in the field of language studies, very important subject she addressed. I'm very fortunate that to get invitation from her. and from Mizoram University. Thank you very much. Now I start my discussion. Before I start, I just share my screen so that things will be clear to us. Is it visible, Kavita?
Yes, sir, it is visible.
Yeah.
Sir, can you do it full screen, sir?
Yes.
Yes.
Is it
Thank
okay
you.
now?
Yes, sir, it's okay now.
Yeah, the topic today which we are going to discuss is phenomenology and research. And this is the most difficult subject in the field of history of ideas. It's a very, very difficult task which I'm going to, do today. And I need your cooperation and your comments, critical comments, and your critical inputs, so that all of us can, together we can make an attempt to understand what is phenomenology and its implications to education. Friends, I want to work on understanding phenomenology in the beginning. Understanding phenomenology is very difficult. It's not very easy. It's a very complex task. So what I do is I start with certain preliminary ideas and gradually I move to the complex ideas in philosophy and phenomenology. Friends, what is philosophy? Because understanding phenomenology has many important, connected with so many important questions. I'm not going to do academic exercise. I'll be doing much more rigorous exercise today. The question, what is philosophy? We need to understand phenomenology, we need to have some clarity about certain fundamental questions. So what is philosophy is, you all know, it is very contesting. There is no one single definition for philosophy. And philosophy has been changing over a period of time, like Alice in Wonderland. And during ancient period and medieval time, philosophy was something, and in the modern era, philosophy was something else. And the postmodern era, philosophy has taken a different shape. Richard Rorty, a famous American philosopher, categorized the entire history of ideas into three important major epochs or conceptual periods. That also I try to discuss a little bit and slowly move into German philosophy, what is German philosophy and what is importance of German philosophy, and phenomenology as a German thought. Some of the issues I try to address, and to to move on, philosophy is considered by philosophers as the foundational discipline. We need to understand each and every word. Foundational discipline in the sense it is the it is the basic thing, or it is the foundation on which other disciplines emerge. Uh, Philosophers in the history placed philosophy at a higher pedestal once upon a time during Aristotle and Plato and during ancient period. But slowly, the philosophy, as I mentioned, has undergone change and its status has been questioned over a period of time. And how the status of philosophy has been questioned and what role phenomenology has taken in questioning the status, and what kind of problems, philosophy and phenomenology addressed in the history. Some of these things also we try to discuss. Issues addressed by traditional philosophy, I don't go into the details, but certain preliminaries are very important to place phenomenology in a larger framework. What is ultimate reality? This is a metaphysical question. associated with ontological questions. People have raised important questions about what is ultimate reality from the beginning. This kind of questions are raised not only in India, but also in the West and also many other countries. People have raised very, very fundamental questions because they thought understanding reality is important for all human beings. For human existence, understanding reality is important. That's why people have raised questions, what is reality? And slowly they started questioning, is reality material or spiritual? Is reality dynamic or permanent? Okay. Some of these questions, associated questions, made the entire field of philosophy vibrant, and philosophers across the globe, participated in this kind of discourse at different epochs of time. And also during Aristotle and Platonic period, the issue of mind-body relationship has become very prominent, and that was again revised in the modern era by Descartes and other philosophers. That also partly we try to, discuss. When I say functions of philosophy, friends, what philosophy does, we all know, because we need to understand phenomenology, what phenomenology does. To understand that, I have framed this slide. We need to understand what are the functions of philosophy. In the history of intellectual thought, philosophy was understood, the primary role of philosophy, people thought that to raise fundamental questions. So that's why it is called foundational inquiry. And philosophy clarifies ideas. It should clarify ideas and concepts. And philosophy should provide a rational explanation, logical explanations of various events and phenomena. And philosophy, some people thought that it should analyze the language and it should critique the existing language. See, there are wonderful ways how philosophers are looking at the functions of philosophy. And some of these questions, were centered around human life and existence, particularly after Second World War, when existentialism as a school of philosophy emerged, where people experienced pain, agony, suffering, from that Second World War consequences, a new philosophical ideas emerged, centered around life and existence. And not only in the Second World War, but before in the Oriental countries, from the beginning, philosophers in India and China and Southeast Asian countries were raising very important questions regarding life, and human existence. For example, Buddha has raised very important philosophical questions in India and Oriental countries. And philosophy is another important function, which Edmund Husserl, the famous phenomenologist, talks about, is to understand, analyze reality, self, and problems of life. And ultimately, most of the philosophers, they agree that the function of philosophy is liberation. Why do you want to have philosophy? You liberate yourself. Liberation, which we call it as moksha in our Indian context. And philosophy, as I have mentioned, it has changing assumptions, its own assumptions, the kind of, for example, if you take 15th to 17th century, the idea of philosophizing has radically undergone change. Why? Because there are so many developments in science. Scientific, advancement, from starting with Galileo, Copernicus, entire Newtonian mechanics, people started raising very fundamental questions about physical reality. That has influenced philosophy, and philosophers were asking a different kind of questions. And during this period, particularly 15th to 17th century, reason became prominent. That's why we call it as, this is a modern period. I think all these things are necessary to, to understand the basics of phenomenological nuances, how phenomenology has, has taken shape in the history. Understanding any concept in phenomenology requires its trajectory, its total evolutionary history. That is the reason why I'm addressing some of these questions today. Friends, the birth of modernity, during 17th and 18th century, with the rise of Cartesian philosophy, which most of us are familiar with, which addressed basically a mind-body problem. And also, reason has become the important central subject in the entire philosophical discourse during this particular period. Philosophy has become as a rational reconstruction. It's a rational reconstructive enterprise. Philosophy provides logical and rational, explanations, resurrection of reason. This is a emphasis on this. When you come to the 20th century, most of us are familiar with in universities today, the colonial and post-colonial developments. And after two world wars, new intellectual movements emerged in the history. And philosophy has taken a totally different, radical direction known as linguistic turn. I'm not going to address about linguistic turn here, but just to mention to you how the basic assumptions of philosophy and the questions which they addressed in the history over a period of time, how they have undergone change. And as I mentioned to you, Richard wrote is, three important epochs in the history of philosophy, coming to the ancient to medieval period. Mostly it was a metaphysical kind of questions were raised, starting with Plato, Aristotle, Thomas Aquinas, so many philosophers, many Greek philosophers, Anaximander, Epicurus, there are many philosophers who raised very fundamental questions regarding reality. So that entire period, more than 2,000, 3,000 years of time, people have, discussed about what is reality. Then, after medieval period, when people have experienced the discoveries in science, maybe from 14th century, 15th century, 16th century, 17th century, people started raising very important questions about knowledge. You see, and people are after reason, logical explanation. This is what I have mentioned. So reason has become the prominent category in philosophical discourse during 14th to 17th and 18th century. So this is a very important development. But in the post-colonial era, particularly after 1950s and 60s, people started questioning the foundations of reason itself. People started critiquing reason, the entire Western epistemology itself. And people thought that, language is important to understand what is existing. Linguistic construction, people started thinking about how do human beings linguistically construct their experiences. That is a different term, which we call it as a linguistic term. This is a very general background, which I want to present before I enter into the serious discourse on phenomenology. And at every period of time, maybe particularly in the modern period, philosophy experienced identity crisis. Because what should philosophers do? What is their identity? Because when metaphysics has been sidelined and epistemology has come into prominence during modern and the age of science, and philosophers experiencing their identity crisis. And in language, when language has become the important discourse during post-colonial period, the identity of philosophers is it has become fractured. This is a very serious issue in the entire history of philosophy itself. What is philosophy and what should philosophers do? These questions have become very important questions. And the foundations of philosophy has undergone major shifts, changing language games and the entire history of philosophy. And in 20th century, particularly in the language philosophy, there are two different styles of language philosophy. In the Western context itself, we find two important ways of doing philosophy in the Western philosophy, that is continental philosophy and Anglo-Saxon world. Anglo-Saxon philosophy, we mean, philosophers coming from United Kingdom, Canada, United States of America, and Australia, and many other countries. And continental is the continental Europe, German, France, Italy, Greece, so there are two different styles of philosophy. Anglo-Saxon way of doing philosophy for more analytical approach. That is the reason linguistic analysis has become an important philosophical thought, in the Anglo-Saxon world in the 20th century. And when you come to the continental style of doing philosophy, mostly Nietzsche and phenomenologists like Husserl, Martin Heidegger, Gadamer, Putnam, many other people have done philosophy in a different way. So there are two important styles of doing continental and non-continental or Anglo-Saxon philosophies. When you come to the contemporary philosophies like phenomenology, hermeneutics, existentialism, I'm just mentioning a few. Philosophy of language, or some of these philosophies are associated with anti-representationalism and anti-essentialism. They questioned the traditional philosophical concepts, the philosophical concepts which were very rigid during 15th to 17th century. For example, reason, truth, knowledge, objectivity. Science has given a lot of importance to all these categories, because scientific developments happened just because of defining certain things. And there are so many other aspects which are associated with scientific advancement, but science looked at reason, truth, knowledge, and objectivity, some of these concepts in a different way. So science has its own unique way of doing its own disciplinary work. And when we come to the philosophy in Germany, why I'm saying this is phenomenology as a systematic philosophy has emerged in Germany, and it has got a lot of rich philosophical tradition. It was influenced by many philosophers. We need to understand how different philosophies influenced Edmund Husserl or phenomenological thought. It's very important to understand the substantive aspects of phenomenology itself. That is the reason why I am just bringing this philosophical context, the historical context of the emergence of phenomenology. Friends, we know very important philosophers like Immanuel Kant. Immanuel Kant, most of you know, who did a lot of work on in critique of pure reason and critiquing judgment. He did a lot of work in the area of epistemology and also in ethics and morals. And some philosophers say that Kant actually has studied the entire history of philosophy. Okay, he brought all schools of philosophy together and started critiquing it. And from his critique of the entire history of philosophy, different schools of philosophy, new philosophical ideas emerged. Okay, lot of diversions, intellectual diversions emerged in the when Kant started his critique of pure reason. That's why Immanuel Kant is also considered as, it is like a railway junction. His entire philosophy is like a junction where all ancient philosophies, medieval philosophies came together. Okay, he started systematically analyzing, synthesizing, and critiquing, and from such kind of exercise, new philosophical ideas emerged, and which has given rise to phenomenology, hermeneutics, language philosophy, whatnot. That's why Kant is very, very important philosopher. And Hegel, Karl Marx, who are trying to understand, their main objective was not just to explain, but also change the world. And Ludwig Wittgenstein, student of Bertrand Russell, did intensive work in the field of language studies, and he's very famous for generally, Wittgenstein, people say he has two phases of Wittgenstein. Uh, and Wittgenstein first phase and Wittgenstein second phase. In the Wittgenstein first phase, you find Tractatus Logico Mathematicus. That is the very important book which has written. And, the second phase of Wittgenstein is totally different. And Frege was an important mathematician. Some of these mathematicians, philosophers, including Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, Edmund Husserl, Martin Heidegger, Wittgenstein is appearing 2 times, I'm sorry, and Theodor Adorno, Leibniz, and Gadamer, including Albert Einstein, Sigmund Freud, Rudolf Carnap, Max Scheler, you name, hardcore philosophers have come from Germany, who influenced the entire history of philosophy in a qualitative way, in a radical way. Why this happened from Germany? Why rich philosophical tradition emerged in Germany itself? Why not in other countries? Maybe this is a different kind of question, which I'm not going to address, but it's a very interesting question. We all know that, till 17th century, the Roman Catholic Church was by and large maintaining the intellectual discourses in Europe. And because Roman Catholic Church given importance to Latin, and most of the philosophical discourses were happening in Latin, that was the international universalized kind of language across Europe. But in the 18th century, people started writing in their vernacular, their regional languages. People asserted their own nationalities, so their own national languages. So they started philosophizing in regional languages. This is the beautiful expression of human thought in Western Europe, during 18th century. And that has given rise to multiple perspectives, different ways of looking at the world. Philosophical expressions have come about. This is just, I want to bring it to your notice. When you talk about post-Kantian thought, it's 2:30. Kant, Hegel, Marx, they all are the hardcore philosophers. And as I mentioned, by and large, the entire philosophy in Germany, unlike Anglo-Saxon world, they were focusing on human dimension, how philosophy, they thought that philosophers should address very important issues like human existence, pain, their suffering. You know, so human dimension has become an important aspect of entire German thought. This we find, specific to German and continental philosophy. Whereas you may find certain things in Anglo-Saxon world, but the focus is not on human dimension. This is a slight, we can distinguish between these two. Anglo-Saxon philosophical schools focused more on analytical work. For example, clarification of language. If you take freedom itself, the concept freedom, they were analyzing every concept, like what is freedom of, what is freedom to, what is freedom by. They started semantic and syntactic kind of explorations, in the entire logical positivism, for example, and people were closely working in the Anglo-Saxon world. Most of the philosophers, working with hardcore mathematicians like Rudolf Carnap and also Bertrand Russell. They were also doing a lot of analytical philosophy. What I want to say here is that, in German thought is mostly from the human angle, people were philosophizing. This is a very important aspect we need to understand, because phenomenology, when you're trying to understand, because it emerged in Germany and they have human concern, that part we should not forget, when we are trying to understand uh, phenomenology. And also, in German philosophy, you have Hegel's emphasis on historicity, but people have become very critical over a period of time, the historicity, but Karl Marx has taken, it as an important aspect, and when he synthesized historicity with materialism, it has become historical materialism, and Marx took the dialectics from Hegel and from materialism from Feuerbach, and Marx and Engels did a lot of work and synthesizing different philosophical ideas from Hegel, Feuerbach, and came out with their own dialectical interpretation of historical materialism. And during this period, phenomenology, okay, which was influenced by all these philosophical thoughts in Germany, phenomenological thoughts were there in the history. But Edmund Husserl is the first person who philosophized it, who has given a shape to the entire school of phenomenology. He shaped he has given a direction, he shaped, and he showed what phenomenology should address, and it has become a systematic, philosophical moment. That is the contribution of Edmund Husserl. And Husserl's student, Martin Heidegger, he was a student and he learned a lot from Husserl. Both were working together for a long time, but there's a lot of political and economic changes in Europe where Heidegger differed from Husserl, and Heidegger became very close to the power, and he became minister, and he became a very important administrative position in university, and he totally, whatever he learned, one important aspect which we need to understand is Heidegger was student of Husserl and associated with him in many meetings and in many writings. But at the second stage, Heidegger differed from Husserl and started hermeneutic phenomenology, a new way of looking at phenomenology. That Heidegger's contribution, which I'm not going to address in this today. And Heidegger followed by Gadamer and the living, Habermas, which we all know, very important philosopher. and existentialism, then the critical theory. There are some of the important intellectual diversions within in Germany. When I coming to phenomenology, friends, we need to do a lot of rigorous exercise because that is the background which I have just explained to you. But now we need to go in a systematic way. This is the most difficult job. Phenomenology is not phenomenalism. See, Berkeley's idea of phenomenalism is totally different from phenomenology. Okay. And first idea which I would like to place before you is phenomenology. From the beginning, it quarreled against naturalism. According to naturalism, which is the, naturalism is the philosophy of the hardcore sciences. Most of the sciences which believe in naturalism, for them, only physical, the world is real and it exists independent of human beings. Okay. The world outside, there is a world outside. That world outside is real. And most of the scientists, they assume this. Most of us, we also assume this, that there is a world outside and which exists independent of us. This is naturalism. This is naturalism and natural world thesis. Most of the scientists are, they believe in this kind of idea, and they fail to see the nature of experience itself. The person who is looking at the world, what he or she is experiencing, that is totally excluded from naturalism. This naturalism which I'm talking is not naturalism which some people understand from Tagore and others. No, not that kind of romantic naturalism. I'm talking, about the naturalism which science believes. That's the important aspect. So, friends, this is one important. In other words, phenomenology started fighting with science. This is what I want to say here. Because science totally sidelines subjectivity. Scientists were always, they wanted objectivity, objective knowledge. But phenomenology has developed a critique on science. How it developed a critique on science, we try to understand. The other quarrel, against historicism. According to historicism, nothing is stable and no objective truth. It denies possibility of truth because historically determined, there are no absolute truths. Validity of knowledge and objectivity, it denies. Everything is a part of the entire historical process, including truth is a part of the historical entire flow. According to historicism, there are no solid foundations of knowledge. Everything undergoes change. Everything is determined with socio-cultural context, historical context. Phenomenology is a critique on historicism. Like, it was very critical about naturalism. It was also critical about historicism. And to a certain extent, phenomenology, though it is to a certain extent idealist in its nature, but excessive idealism, excessive subjectivity, phenomenology critiqued. For phenomenology, consciousness is the foundation of every knowledge. We will come to this point, we will stretch this point in other slides, but try to get this get idea about what I'm saying here. So phenomenology as a school of philosophy, it critiqued scientific enterprise, scientific practices, and the foundations of science, and also historicism, and to a certain extent, idealism. And during this period, in the beginning, including Husserl and many others, giving a lot of importance to psychology and sociology, because these two disciplines which emerged in the history were, these disciplines were imitating natural science models. The psychologists and sociologists claimed their disciplines as scientific disciplines, because science has become very highly respectable position because of its the kind of civilization it has established. So psychology and sociology also made an attempt to imitate the models and methods of pure scientific disciplines. And phenomenology, Husserl thought, can become a strong and strong when it has a strong methodology. Enter Husserl's journey in the history is to consolidate, is to give shape to the methodology of phenomenology that we discuss, in some of the slides. And human experience is an important part of phenomenological discourse. Husserl believed that philosophers should describe human experiences and analyze the intellectual processes of which we are introspectively aware. Somehow I'm aware that you are there. You see? I request every one of you, please try to philosophize yourself so that you can, we all can think together. And here, you see, science try to understand the world through certain models, causal models, structural equation models, to understand the external objects. Causality is a cardinal principle in science. And when scientists is trying to understand the outside external world, scientists' representative, model, how he is representing outside reality, is structured through causality. And scientific assumptions are rooted in the law of causation. Husserl says, let us not think about this kind of models. Let us bracket out these models. Let us grasp experience, what we experience, intuitively what we experience. I'll come to this point in other slides also. I try to, my struggle is, to make, things clear. I don't know, because this subject itself is a very dense and complex. This is a very challenging task to move on. Phenomenology, which Husserl was talking about, he was a great mathematician, logician, but turned to philosophy. He learned philosophy by reading Lambert, Kant, Fichte, great mathematicians, Hegel, Ernest Mach, and studied philosophy with, he was a student of Brentano. Brentano did a lot of work in psychology and in critical psychology. And he was influenced by, Husserl was influenced by David Hume. David Hume is one of an important empiricist, And along with Brentano, Husserl explored the role played by psychology in understanding of numbers. Friends, I will show you some slides, very interesting slides, how Husserl, started critiquing, learning from, Brentano, critiquing psychology. But in the beginning periods of his life, he was very much fascinated with the methods of psychology and sociology. And Husserl's inquiry into the foundations of mathematics led him to logic. Husserl was exploring what are the foundations of mathematics and what foundations mathematics has as a system it has been developed. What are the foundational aspects? Most of the philosophers in the continental regions, including Husserl, believed in logic is the foundation. But when they started exploring logic, and they entered into epistemology, and to a certain extent, Husserl also believed that epistemological foundations of disciplinary knowledges, that he was philosophizing. From there, again, in his later period, he has taken a different turn, and his discourse on foundations of knowledge itself has become very interesting point that we will be discussing shortly. So what I'm saying is, Husserl main question which he was trying to grapple was, what is the foundations of knowledge? Is the foundations of mathematics logic? All knowledge is a derivative from logic? Or logic itself has emerged from epistemology? Or epistemology is the foundation for entire philosophy? But ultimately he said, nothing doing, only phenomenology can become the foundation for all kinds of knowledge. This is what we are going to discuss. Friends, I may not present the entire phenomenology because it's a very broad subject. I make little effort to bring some important questions and how, Husserl, attempted to grapple with these questions and what kind of solutions he has given. And from these solutions, one can, identify certain methodological, methodological insights to do social science or science research. That is the reason, please listen carefully what I'm saying, so that in the question answer session, we can have a, very, very solid discussion on some of these things. Phenomenology, for Husserl, it provides foundation for philosophy itself. All schools of philosophy, philosophical knowledge, the foundation is phenomenology for Husserl. Including for science, any kind of so-called rational enterprises, disciplines of knowledges, for them also phenomenology can become the foundation. How it can become as a foundation, we will see. One important insight which he is talking about is philosophy, when it tries to become a foundation for science and other disciplines of knowledges, one important aspect in philosophy is speculation. Speculation is an important characteristic of philosophizing. And rational speculation, because rational speculation, there is a space for that in philosophizing. So philosophy or phenomenology can become the foundation for all. Because during 16th and 18th century, most of the philosophers, most of the scientists rejected philosophy. Philosophy is irrelevant. Philosophers have no role to play. And when philosophers started doing philosophy of science, then scientists became very critical. When I was doing my doctoral research in the area of philosophy of science, I used to encounter lot of literature which was written by scientists against philosophers of science. Very interesting stuff. They were questioning how philosophers of science can contribute to scientific knowledge. That's an important question they were raising. What is your contribution for the growth of scientific knowledge? Then philosophers of science do not have an answer. Philosophers of science used to say that, our role is a critical role. But Husserl is talking about that philosophy can become the foundations of science. That is what a beautiful idea which we need to understand from Husserl. Phenomenology, unlike science, it doesn't assume anything. There are no assumptions, presuppositions. That is the reason it is known as presuppositionless philosophy. And Husserl talked about consciousness. This is an important category, in the entire phenomenological schools. Across the schools, consciousness is an important subject matter. And consciousness as a philosophical category, understanding consciousness and its manifestations. Okay, and one may move towards understanding the other disciplines. In other words, if you want to understand scientific disciplines in science, Husserl argued that you need to understand what is consciousness. And he goes into, in detail, very analytic. There are a lot of concepts which are very, which have deeper meaning that we try to understand. Edmund Husserl's phenomenology has taken many turns. In the beginning, it was a descriptive phenomenology. And over a period of time, it has become a transcendental phenomenology. And phenomenology as a transcendental idealism, that's what I'm saying in this slide, is that all meaning had its source in the transcendental ego. What is this transcendental ego? Which is beyond spatio-temporal aspects. And this idea that transcendental ego, from everything generates from transcendental ego, it is a radical departure from many traditional concepts. And this particular idea has influenced existentialism and hermeneutics and many other intellectual schools in Germany. As I mentioned earlier, René Descartes influenced Husserl, and Cartesian theories, rationalist theories, which because of Descartes during Enlightenment period, reason has become, the modernity has become the model. And David Hume, empiricist, also influenced Husserl. And I already mentioned, and Kant and Brentano, the famous, his own teacher, and Bolzano, logician and mathematician with whom he interacted. All these people have greatly influenced Husserl's ideas of phenomenology. Today, I'm talking only about Husserl. I'm not going into Martin Heidegger's and other development, grammar and other developments. And Husserl, phenomenology, also in a total way, I am not going to present. Part of it, certain drops of it, I'm going to present before you, because it is so vast, so complex, and I'm not able to, I cannot do that. It is such a very deep exercise one has to do. Little what I have learned from my friends, the late Professor Chinmay Goswami, with whom I used to read Husserl's original texts. And we made an attempt to read for months and months together. And from Professor Chinmay and many friends in different parts of India, in IITs, in the schools of philosophy, departments of philosophy, to a certain extent influenced me to read Husserl and Martin Heidegger. But I don't consider myself as an authority, or the way I am explaining is the one way of looking at Husserl, maybe. And phenomenology has an important word called phenomena. Friend, this we know that in Kantian philosophy, Kant distinguishes between phenomena and noumena. Phenomena is appearance, and noumena is which is hidden. That is a different kind of classification for Kantian scholars. But when we are talking about phenomenology, the phenomena, quote unquote, has got certain specific connotation. Phenomena is what appears to us. What appears to us, immediate appearance. It's appearing not just outside, but also inside. Inside, so many things appear. Okay? So inside and outside, phenomena you need to understand from that perspective. Different traditions of thought has dealt with this notion of what appears to us differently. Hardcore science has also explained, phenomena in a different way. Physicists' way of understanding phenomena is a different way. And today, neurocognitive psychologists or medical practitioners, medical scientists, their way of looking at phenomena is totally different. They are trying to explain in terms of neural networks, neural network models. So this phenomena, the word phenomena, it doesn't have one single unified meaning. Different philosophers, different schools of philosophy, including different schools in the phenomenology itself, define phenomena in a different way. For example, when you come to Descartes, ideas appear to us as rationally formed, clear and distinct ideas. Idea, when you say idea itself is a, there is a, logical reconstruction. Descartes' investigation, what is valid knowledge, what is reliable knowledge, and what is certainty.
It's 3 o'clock.
Basically, Descartes' struggle was to understand, to understand what is the knowledge which I can trust. What is that certain knowledge? What is that valid knowledge which I can trust? And on the basis of which I can build different disciplines of knowledge. And he was doubting everything. Descartes was doubting everything, the entire external world and his sensory organs, everything he was, doubting. Ultimately, he has come to, in the entire journey of doubting, he has come to one conclusion that the only thing which I cannot doubt is about that I am doubting. The only thing I cannot doubt is I am doubting. So he started with that. That is certain knowledge. Okay. The person who is doubting, that is a certain knowledge. So from that certain knowledge, the person who is doubting, Descartes started building his entire philosophy. Descartes' modeling with science and mathematics, if you look at the method, he has given methodology for philosophy, methodology of doubt, in order to reach the indubitable starting point for all thought and knowledge. Famous mathematicians like Peano, for example, started his axiomatic number systems, influenced by Cartesian schools of philosophy. So any kind of deductive axiomatic systems in the field of science or in mathematics or in the field of logic, they are all, rational reconstructions. Whereas when you come to the David Hume, Humean and empiricist way of looking at reality, looking at knowledge was, they were also searching for impressions. And they were accumulating all the impressions and trying to build connections between the impressions. And that is the way they were thinking about building empirical knowledge. That is a different model. But Cartesian modeling is to start with self-evident truths, axioms, then postulates, then go to theories. This style is entirely different. This is a different continental style. Whereas the empiricist style is an Anglo-Saxon style, mostly originated in Britain. Empirical sciences, the advancements in empirical sciences basically in the have come from Anglo-Saxon world. Husserl's phenomenological conception of the suspension of beliefs. See, when you're looking at the objective world, when you want to understand the world outside, the appearances outside, you bracket out all your suppositions. See, this is a little, little difficult to grasp. I move to some other slides so that I can present in a better way. But what Husserl is talking about here is suspension of beliefs and the idea of presuppositionless philosophy. They're the important points which Husserl is talking about. For empiricists, what is given to us in experience, that is sensory data. And John Locke or David Hume or many empiricists try to see the patterns in the impressions and sensory data. And they were trying to derive theory from establishing connections between different impressions and sensory data. And this kind of approach also, Husserl was influenced by this empiricist approach. What I'm saying here is, phenomenology was influenced, or Husserl was influenced by Cartesian rationalists and equally the empiricist philosophers like David Hume. Because David Hume talks about impressionism, a world in terms of impressions and ideas. Because when he's talking about the external world, it appears as an impression, as an idea. The world appears to us in terms of ideas. That is the sensory data. And here, if you see, Husserl here is also speaking about the world as it is given to us in our most immediate experiences. I will elaborate this point. I request all of you to have patience, because some of these things are we need to move in difficult waters, they are very, very dense, concepts. Husserl appreciates Hume's approach. For him, impressions as they given to us are unconnected. In Humean thought, the impressions which you are getting from outside objective world, they are not connected. There is a flow of impressions. There is a flow of ideas. John Locke also talks about primary ideas and secondary ideas, that kind of theory you find in John Locke. And when an empiricist is trying to connect these impressions, and these connections are external to the impressions. When you're theorizing, when you're logically connecting or theorizing, okay, and this entire theorization is an external modeling on, empirical data. David Hume, it's a very important philosopher in continental world. David Hume, one important question which he raised is the problem of induction, which was taken by Karl Popper and many other mathematicians and philosophers. Science builds its knowledge systems on the basis of inductive generalizations. David Hume says, when you are getting impressions, on the basis of the impressions, you make a generalization. And tomorrow, a new impression comes, this entire generalization you need to modify, or you may reject this impression. So this is the problem within the inductive generalization itself. That's a very interesting example which Karl Popper and many other philosophers talks about is, we all know that sun rises in the east. Sun rises in the east. How do we know that sun rises in the east? So because today I have seen, yesterday I saw, and I have been experiencing every day that sun is appearing in the east. So I have, from all these experiences, my conclusion is, my theory is that sun rises in the east. That is my theory. But Hume says, but this theory, you are extending it to tomorrow. You are believing that tomorrow also sun rises in the east. But there is a logical possibility that sun may not appear in the east tomorrow. If that possibility, if you consider, then your entire system of knowledge, which you designed on the foundations of inductive logic, is doubtful. And Hume also, in the course of time, Hume also, has become very skeptical about, human reasoning faculty itself. And Husserl overcomes, Hume's skepticism by emphasizing on intentionality, which is known as the structure of consciousness. You see, consciousness has an attribute. It is a consciousness is always intentional in nature. Human consciousness always intends. There is an intentionality to. If I utter a word, it becomes narrow. That's why try to understand. Consciousness has intentionality. You are perceiving this world because consciousness tries to grasp. It's not that, like empiricists believed, that all external world, the sensory sensations, there is a cause and effect relationships, and external world, from that you get impressions and they enter into the brain. Information processing happens. These are all different kind of models. But Husserl is talking about no. That is not correct. Human consciousness itself has got intentionality. So this idea of intentionality, one need to understand to build, valid and reliable foundations of knowledge. Hope I am just moving, Kavita, how much time do we have? Up to what time can I proceed?
So you can proceed till 3:30, sir.
3:30. Oh,
Yes.
very short time. Okay. In this slide, which just this Kantian fusion of Kant, which tried to synthesize empiricism and rationalism, this kind of Kantian effort greatly influenced Edmund Husserl. Edmund Husserl also has taken insights from rationalism and empiricism. So I need not spend much time on Immanuel Kant because most of you know very well. And the point here we need to understand is the conditions of knowledge which Kant is philosophizing, they are in the human subject. That's a very important point. That's Kant's a priori. Immanuel Kant's a priori, before experience itself, a priori, it is the a priori system directs the human being what to experience. So human subject, before experience itself, human subject, when he is talking about the 12 important categories which are human beings endowed as a priori knowledge. With that 12 categories of a priori knowledge, human beings acquire a posteriori or experiential knowledge. So this is a very important aspect which impressed Edmund Husserl. This a priori is very close to Husserlian intentionality of consciousness. You can see how these two ideas are moving parallelly. For Husserl, knowledge of the world we intend depends on the person. It depends on subjectivity or human consciousness. But whereas Kant is talking about human mind, a priori for him is in human mind. Husserl, he doesn't talk about human mind, he always talks about consciousness. And what are the preconditions of knowledge? Both Kant and Husserl. For Kant, it is a priori. For Husserl, it is intentionality of consciousness. So in that sense, both of them are transcendental philosophers. Friends, Husserl teacher Brentano, who, as I mentioned, that who made significant contribution in critiquing psychology, his own discipline itself, distinguishes two important phenomena, psychic and physical phenomena. For Brentano, objects and events around us, other people, ourselves, even in reflection of our own conscious experiences, as we experience these, things as they are given to our consciousness, whether in perception or imagination or thought or volition. You see, you can see here, Brentano is using the word consciousness. Husserl, who was associated with Brentano for a long time, learning from him, he got this insight that intentionality of consciousness from the idea of consciousness which Brentano has brought into the philosophical discourse. For Brentano, mental phenomena, are what occur in the mind, are acts of consciousness, are their contents. Physical phenomena is the objects of external perception, starting with colors and shape. This is the way how Brentano made a distinction between mental phenomena and physical phenomena. But Husserl is talking about intentionality. This mental phenomena for Husserl intentionally it acts of consciousness. And these ideas which, Brentano and Husserl, both of them, together they were discussing, and Brentano in one way, because Husserl was very fascinated by psychology, then Brentano was very critical about psychology, and from Brentano, Husserl started learning how to critique psychology. Slowly, the descriptive psychology phase of Edmund Husserl was basically derived from Brentano. When Husserl, in his first phase of work, when he's talking about the descriptive psychology, before he became transcendental phenomenologist, when he was talking about descriptive phenomenology, the descriptive phenomenology idea for Husserl has come from descriptive psychology, which was discussed by Brentano. Descriptive psychology defines and classifies the various types of mental phenomena. Every mental phenomena or act of consciousness is directed towards some object. This thesis of Brentano, that intentional directedness, that is the central idea of Brentano's descriptive psychology. Here, Husserl replaces psychical phenomena with experiences. He doesn't talk about psychical and physical kind of distinction, and Husserl is talking about the experiences or intentional experiences. Always consciousness is intentional, aiming at or referring to something objective. And some people say that Edmund Husserl was also influenced by William James, because during that period, when he wrote the philosophical investigations, during that period only the Principles of Psychology was published and was circulated in Europe. Another important logician, Bernard Bolzano, from who made the distinction between subject and object ideas of representations, separation of logic from psychology, because most of the philosophers at that time were trying to understand logic, the foundations of logic, people thought that that is in psychology. Because logic talks about reasoning. So the reasoning is related to thinking. So the thinking processes are psychologists, they make an attempt to understand. So ultimately, logical judgments, logical decisions, the entire logical discourse, the foundation of it is, people thought it is psychology. But Belzano made an attempt to de-psychologize the entire discourse. And he started anti-psychological movement. Belzano argued that logic and psychology are two different disciplines. Logic talks about objective ideas, including propositions, which in turn make up objective theories as in the sciences. Psychology, which is purely subjective ideas and concrete content of mental activities in particular minds at a given time. And from this, to study the phenomena experienced in various acts of consciousness that are immediately given to us, by suspending all considerations of the objective reality or subject association without any presuppositions, how the phenomenological idea is emerging, you can see from this slide. The central motive of Husserl was to search for certainty. Like, Descartes, Descartes was absolute certainty that I think, therefore I exist. Philosophy as a rigorous science dealing with ideal objects or essences of things originating in the consciousness. The outside world, the consciousness, through consciousness, you grasp the essence of the objective world, outside world. You see, the essences of consciousness. That's why Husserl is talking about phenomena, and its essences originate in consciousness. Just like Immanuel Kant talks about a priori. Philosophy has to be rigorous science. Science, we all know, it is a system of knowledge connected by reason. And logical constructions, you find in the scientific theorization. What is knowledge? Knowledge is about these theorization, these connections, propositional, when you connect and when you build a model. And Husserl's entire, effort was to have such foundational, to make phenomenology as the foundation of knowledge. Husserl also believed that philosophy cannot be founded on other sciences. Again, but philosophy should give other sciences the foundation. For Husserl, sciences are in crisis because the foundations on which sciences are existing is unintelligible foundation. Actually, sciences, when they are dealing the physical reality, ultimately they should turn towards subjective world. This is what in Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that the subject interferes, in Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that when the subject in the nuclear physics interferes with the object, and reality you need to grasp from the function of that. Philosophy must accept a radical position, go to the foundations of all knowledge. When people started questioning, philosophers do not have any role to play. Husserl is the person who said philosophy is an important discipline, foundational discipline, and that philosophy is only phenomenology. That's what he's talking about. And such phenomenology for Husserl is an ideal science. The science of sciences. Phenomenology is the science of sciences. It is an ideal science for Husserl. Kavita, can we stop here and start discussion, or what do you suggest?
Yes, sir. We can stop here. If you still have any more slides, sir, we can.
I have many slides.
Okay, sir.
Many slides because it's a long journey.
Yes, sir.
I thought, I can take you along with me in this entire journey and stop somewhere.
Okay, sir.
And we start discussing. We
Yes.
can do that because discussion might help, to clarify some of our ideas and to move further.
True, sir. Sir, it is such a great presentation, and the philosophy that you have covered. I think it's very dense, and at the same time, it is so much clarity you have brought to us. And I think it must have left everyone thinking. They are still in the mode of thinking about this entire phenomenology, and they are trying to trace their own consciousness about this philosophical journey. So we right now have very one or two questions on this, sir. So they have asked, like, for example, one of the participant is asking, sir, that what is the credit given by philosophy to the modern society?
What is the
credit given by philosophy to the modern society?
It's a very difficult question, I think. What is the credit? I don't understand.
Yes, sir.
What does he mean by credit? Philosophy, to my mind,
Yes.
because it's a very difficult question he's questioning. To my mind, philosophy tries to give a coherent picture about our human life itself. It connects various aspects and tries to theorize and give a theory to all of us. When you have new education policy, you have a theory in new education policy. In every human action, you have some kind of philosophy. So let us not think that philosophy is totally different from our practice, our everyday life. Philosophy exists in our feelings, actions, everywhere. But academic philosophy, academic discourses are totally different kind of discourses. Philosophy contributes a lot for clarifying our language, clarifying our thought. This is what I can say at this point.
So one more question here is that in idealism also, the consciousness is the main.
It is not clear. Your speech is not clear.
Okay, sir. So am I audible properly now?
You are audible now.
Yes, sir. So one of the question here is that, sir, that in idealism also consciousness has been given a lot of importance. So in that way, how phenomenology's consciousness of the phenomena is different from idealism, how these two things depart?
Yeah. Idealism as a, it doesn't have, it's not a unified school of thought. First, we need to understand that. Idealism, we need to understand in multiple ways.
It's 3:30.
Idealism in politics, idealism in pedagogy, idealism in economics, idealism in poetry, idealism in literature. Idealism as a philosophy, when you are talking about as a philosophical school of thought, it itself is very diversified. But idealism believes in consciousness, that is Atman or spirit. Okay, in some philosophers, in some schools of philosophy, it is known as Atma, it is a spirit, it is mind, or it is consciousness, it is Chetana. Okay, and these concepts are metaphysical concepts. For most of the hardcore idealists, the consciousness, which is the metaphysical reality, is the basis of everything. Everything has originated from that consciousness. Okay, and that's why Atman, there are different ways of theorizing Atman itself. I don't go into that because even Adi Shankaracharya, Madhvacharya, there are lots of differences within Dvaita, Advaita schools of philosophy. But in general, when you talk about idealism takes the idea of consciousness as a metaphysical category, and for most of the idealists, consciousness is the basis for the entire creation. So am I audible?
You are audible, sir. Yes, sir, you are audible.
That is my answer, Kavita.
Okay, sir. So one more question related to this one then comes is that someone is asking that can we say that phenomenology is statement of facts because we have to keep aside all our preconceived notions. So can we say that it is just this kind of research is just a statement of facts?
There is some confusion here. You see, facts, actually, study of facts, that enterprise is totally different. That science does that. Science studies facts, but phenomenology, it doesn't talk about factual world. It doesn't believe in factual world. See, it always looks at the grasping essences, through intentionality in consciousness. It talks about such kind of discourse. Always it doesn't talk about facts. Facts, what is a fact? There are a lot of discussion on that. Fact itself is, when you come to the linguistic philosophies, it's a fact is a linguistic construction. But when you go to, modernist scientific project, they believe that facts exist independently, independent of human beings. There are a lot of discourse, a lot of debates on what is fact itself. So in what context, you are thinking about the fact, that has, please make it clear to me so that I can, talk about it a little bit.
So one question here is that how to make a balance between the rigid objectivity of scientificism and the subjectivity of idealism. In what way phenomenology can help us in this one?
Repeat the question, Kavita.
So the question is that how to strike a balance between the rigid objectivity of scientificism and the subjectivity of idealism. In what way phenomenology can help us in this one?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Very good question. This is very difficult to answer because the debate between subjectivity and objectivity is always, there is a rupture between these two. How do we have balance? That some philosophers say that balance is always, you can experience it only through your practice. Okay, so scientific practice or philosophical practice itself will make it clear to you, whether your balance is, these are all experiential. These are all experiential. And I cannot answer, I cannot give ready-made answers to such kind of question, because your practice itself, make you, clarify, whether you are going with a balance or deviating or more towards objectivity or more towards subjectivity, but it's not easy to understand the world.
Yes, sir. Sir, one more question someone is asking, although the question is not very clear. I think the person is asking that for specially abled people, this phenomenology, does it,
What is that?
for specially abled people, the phenomenological experiences, does it differ?
Not able to understand the question. Can
Yes.
some others can also respond to this question? Participant, if there are any participants, they can also.
Sir, we are actually muted from this side, ICT side. So, but if you ask them, then we can unmute, sir. If they want to ask questions to the participants, if you have any questions, you can, yes. Can we ask them to raise their hand so that we can unmute, sir?
Yeah, that gives a lot of flexibility and openness.
Okay, sir. So this is a request to all the participants. If you want to pose any questions, if you have any queries, please raise your hand so that we can unmute you.
Yeah, directly they can ask me. Yeah,
Yes.
by unmuting. Yeah.
So I'm waiting for their response, sir.
Anyone?
Sir, till now no one has raised, because this is a very dense subject. I think it takes a lot of time to imbibe the. Yes, sir.
In Q&A, if there are any, you can read.
Yes, sir. Okay, so one question here is that, although it's not, but probably you can answer this one, sir, that what is the difference between the Western philosophy and Eastern religion?
Eastern philosophy. Religion.
Yes, yes, sir.
Western philosophy and Eastern religion or Eastern philosophy?
The person has written religion, so, but I think probably you can answer in both ways if you think, right, sir?
Yeah, correct. It's a very broad question. I don't know where to start, but only thing I can, one way I can answer is that Western philosophy, according to famous Frank Tilly, the famous philosopher of science, talks about, and many other philosophers also support him, that Western philosophy mostly it tries to control, exert power on the objective world and try to understand. For example, if you take English medicine, the Western philosophy and Western knowledge systems, mostly English and allopathic kind of medicine systems, surgery is a very important, practice. So by operating on human body, by operating in the outside world, controlling outside world, you can generate knowledge. This is the Western way of looking at it. But when you come to Eastern religion, as you rightly said, here philosophy and religion, to a certain extent, they were together and they were different. There's a lot of debate on this. But Eastern religion, it never emphasizes on controlling controlling the objective world. They say that Eastern philosophical way of dealing things are living with the external world. That's why in India and most of the Southeast Asian countries, people always do a lot of worship to trees, animals, diseases, whatnot. They want to live together. They give different names of gods and goddesses to these. Even smallpox becomes a goddess, and people try to live with the goddess smallpox. And like that, whereas in the West, it is a totally, they control, they regulate, they exert power, they manipulate, that kind of philosophical attitude. So this is one way of looking at. I don't know in what context you are asking this question, but whereas the Eastern philosophy of Eastern religious way of looking at is living with nature. Western way of looking at is controlling nature. This is the difference.
Okay, someone has asked you that if you can make, if you can give a general life example or experience to understand phenomenology in some, with some examples.
Yeah. See, these, some of these philosophizing, you take any kind of, external event, external object. You have been experiencing objects around. There are so many books, tables, chairs around you. Okay. And the essence, this experiential world, okay, this experiential world for phenomenology is problematic. That is not it through that impressions what you get through the external world. These impressions, if you think that that can make you form knowledge, phenomenologists do not accept. What they say is your consciousness, always your consciousness intends to look at. Okay, it's a kind of, in Lacanian terms, it's some kind of desire. You always desire. The consciousness intends. There is intentionality in, in consciousness itself. It tries to grab the essence in every object or every event or phenomena which you have been encountering around you. See, that is not the real world. Real world which comes from when your consciousness has got a priori kind of way of looking at. That you need to understand that what Husserl is talking about. This is very difficult to, I don't know how to, there are no concrete examples for this, because this consciousness, you have to make an assumption that there's a consciousness inside, and this consciousness always intends to look at the world, or intends, it tries to give meaning to the world. Okay. And so this consciousness, you need to grasp, the you need to philosophize the what is this consciousness, what are the structures in the consciousness, and what are the essences which you are trying to grasp through this consciousness. Some of these things are highly philosophically loaded terms. You cannot just translate them into ordinary language. Even Husserl, so no one can do that. It's not possible. You need to go to a different level of philosophizing, because consciousness itself, what is consciousness? Itself is a very complex term, that you cannot just explain in terms of, if you just explain in terms of consciousness is, suppose when I am getting some kind of pain here, when I am rubbing my hand, that is a behavioral aspect of it. They're all, but consciousness as a complex category, you need to grasp its essence. Maybe some kind of background reading will help all of us to understand, this debate.
Yes, sir, that's true, sir. One more query here is that phenomenology, if they want to use it as a research method, so what should be the preparation for doing such kind of research?
Yeah, I have a couple of slides I just show you in the last slide. Um, yeah, when you're talking about phenomenological research, but why I have not showed these slides is that without understanding the depth of phenomenology, and talking about phenomenological research is meaningless. So that's why logically, every slide is logically related to the other slide. We need to understand, each and every aspect of its entire journey, so that the entire phenomenology as a moment you can understand, and then its relation with research, maybe in sciences or in social sciences, you may better understand. But most of the people, what they do is they study phenomenological research without understanding the foundations of it. That's why I made an attempt, but I stopped in between because it's a long journey. What is here we are saying is, when you talk about narrative studies by and large is a single individual. Okay. For example, when you go to a slum area or Adivasi area, okay, to study their problems, people's sufferings, people's health conditions, and people's the dominance of patriarchy. There's various ways you can understand. As your objective of the study. So when you go to each and every individual and collect their stories, when you're collecting their stories, writing about their stories, and when you're trying to make meanings, okay, in phenomenology, try to understand, the entire, how people are experiencing suffering, for example, not one single individual, and maybe when you study the lived experience of person in slum areas, and as I said, in different places, experience itself is a conscious process. The development of the essences of these experiences or interpretations of these experiences, okay, that we need to enter into that kind of how people are trying to interpret their own experiences, and from their interpretations you need to grasp the essence of their experience. And as you mentioned, the purpose of philosophical research is to illuminate the specific, to identify phenomena through how they are perceived by the actors in a situation. Pure phenomenological research seeks essentially to describe rather than explain, and to start from a perspective free from hypothesis. You don't make hypothesis here. You are in the exploration, because you are not going with this entire hypothesis testing research is totally different kind of statistical way of looking at the world. You have certain mechanism, you have a set of hypotheses, and you predetermine statistical tests. You have an apparatus. You have theoretical apparatus, you have quantitative apparatus, you have research methodology apparatus. With that, you go to the field, collect data, and do that. But phenomenological research is not that. Phenomenological research is more explorative kind of research. When you go and meet people, you don't go with certain hypotheses. You try to explore. You try to grasp the essences of their consciousness from their interpretations. This is what I want to say. This slide also might help you to a certain extent, and identification of your shared experience You need to identify how people in the slum areas, urban slums, what kind of shared experience they have. Phenomenological research also attempts to locate universal nature of an experience. In the sense, if in urban areas, how people are experiencing the poverty, and the same thing, you can universalize. It should be in a position to universalize, extend that finding to other areas also. And phenomenological research attempt to identify shared experience among various individuals experience the same phenomena. That's what I have mentioned just now. Attempt to locate the essences of the experience. The account of their experience includes what was experienced, how they experienced it. Some of these accounts you need to collect. Their stories, their narratives, their explanations, their interpretations. From that, you need to derive the essence of their experiences. That's a rigorous kind of exercise. For that, you need to understand phenomenology and its entire framework. What I'm saying is, in research methodology textbook, if you can read a chapter on phenomenology, with that you cannot understand, you cannot go and do research. You need to do a lot of meditation with phenomenology. You need to seriously read, understand its nuances and its entire journey, and in that entire journey how various doubts were clarified, various things were taken as insights into the framework, and all these nuances you need to understand. Then only you can adopt phenomenology in research. Otherwise it becomes a very false kind of thing.
So in that way, doesn't the question raise one thing that you said, that like we have to fall back on the participants or whoever's experience we are trying to explore or understand. So it should be their narrative, or can we even do the phenomenological research through observation? Like in ethnographic research, we stay with them and we see their ways of life. So phenomenological research, do they have to depend on the linguistic structures, linguistic expressions, or even the other modes we can use for doing this kind of research?
No, in ethnography and other things, what you do is you collect rich data, and dense data, and micro level data you collect, intensive and rigorous way you collect, ethnographic field studies. But when you come to phenomenological studies, the researcher here is a very important person. Researcher has to bracket out all his presuppositions, and this is, you need to practice like meditation. You need to, understand a lot. That's why what I'm saying is, you need to understand phenomenology and its nature of philosophy, its foundations of philosophy, phenomenology in its complexity. You need to grasp. Then only you can bracket out the presuppositions which you have, and with that presupposition less researcher, you try to encounter the object of your study. So that is the difference. It's not linguistic kind of apparatus you are going with it. When you are going with a questionnaire, you are going with a language. Okay. When you are conducting an interview, you are going with a language. But all such, you are assuming certain things are entering into the field. Okay. But when you are talking to a person, when you're asking him to interpret his story, his account, when you're looking at that, you need to, bracket out your presuppositions. That is very, how to do that, that is the uh, uh, main exercise in phenomenological research.
Sir, so thank you so much, sir, that you give an in-depth analysis as well as the historical and philosophical journey through phenomenology, and even the research aspect you touched upon. And due to the paucity of time, I feel sorry that the participants could not hear the entire presentation that you had prepared for us. And it's my privilege to hear you, and it's an honor for our university to have you with us today. And for the formal vote of thanks, I would like to invite Professor H. Malswamy, Head of the Department of Education and convener of this program, to propose vote of thanks. Now, over to you.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, okay. Uh, uh, thank you, Kavita.
Thank you, madam. Thank you very much for giving the opportunity.
Okay, on behalf of the Department of Education, Mizoram University, I would like to thank Professor V. Sudhakar for his presentation. It was a nice presentation and it was very much informative also. We can say that it is a very informative session. As he has said that phenomenology is a very difficult thing to understand, but when he presented this talk, uh, I find that it is a very interesting presentation, and he explains very well, very clearly what is phenomenology and the use of phenomenology in research. Also, he explains very clearly. So I'd like to thank him and his his lecture, his talk was very interesting, and it was a great eye opener for researcher, especially those persons who want to do qualitative research. So thank you very much, Professor Sudhakar, for your wonderful speech and wonderful talk. I'd also like to thank Kavita also for organizing this webinar. Uh, she has already organized one webinar yesterday also. So I'd like to thank her for her effort. And also I'd like to thank Pratik, who has been helping us with this webinar. And last of all, I'd like to thank all the participants for participating in this webinar. I would like to thank each and every one of you, and I hope that each and every one of you would benefit from this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, madam. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Sir, with your permission, can we end the meeting now?
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much.